Hi, yes. So I'm Kari Dahlgren. I'm Director of Publications at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and I'm really happy to be here today to talk with you about Proyecto Mission Murals, which is an IMLS-funded multi-year project that includes a digital publication, which I will be talking about today, as well as many other programs undertaken by SF MoMA over the course of the past several years. Elements of this project were conceived by each department in the division in which publications is situated at the museum. So our division is education and community engagement, and that encompasses publications along with education, which oversees family, youth, and K-12 programming, public engagement, which oversees programming for our adult audiences, and interpretive media, which produces audio and video programming, among other things. And you'll hear about various elements of this project that were undertaken by those departments as I go through. So as you may know, San Francisco's Mission District has long been recognized as one of the nation's most robust Latinx arts communities, with mural making really always at the center of that activity. And mural making began in earnest in the Mission in the 1970s, when a generation of artists began creating street art that addressed a whole range of socio-political issues, such as education inequality, police brutality, gentrification, human rights abuses, and civil wars in Central America, from which many immigrants to the Mission were fleeing in the 1970s and the 80s. Women and women's issues also played a really prominent role in the art of this period, from the emergence of a group known as the Mujeres Muralistas in the early 1970s to the landmark 1994 murals at the Women's Building in the Mission. So 50 years later, this first generation of mission murals and their makers has been under all kinds of threats. You know, the artists are aging, the neighborhood has changed in so many ways, and the mural sites have, you know, many of them, including I think all of the images in this slide have disappeared under waves of new construction. So after much discussion with the muralists and other Mission community members, SF MoMA embarked on a community-based project to create a bilingual online resource and a range of programming in the museum and in the San Francisco public schools devoted to preserving the history of mural making, preserving the culture, and drawing attention to the kind of fragile ecosystem around these distinctive artworks and culture. So here's just a sort of basic snapshot of the project I'll be focusing on today, the kind of broad framework. And as I mentioned, the digital publication is what I'm here to present about today, but it developed alongside and was transformed by and then kind of further influenced many other elements of this project. It's one part of a really dynamic set of projects, none of which could have really developed on their own. So I'll give you an overview of the development of the project at large, and then I'll share a little bit about the digital publication itself. So why did we decide to undertake this project, and why now? The impetus for this project was really a desire on SF MoMA's part to connect the mural making work of Diego Rivera in San Francisco during the 1930s and 40s to later generations of mural making in the Bay Area. Rivera was really deeply affiliated with the city of San Francisco in various ways, and to SF MoMA, whose founding collection included many gifts of Rivera and Kahlo works. For the exhibition Diego Rivera's America, which opened at SF MoMA this summer, Rivera's murals in Mexico and the US serve as points of departure for a kind of broader understanding of his work. And the show includes paintings and drawings, as well as mural sketches and fresco panels. And as you can see here, we attempted to we made mural projections that then relate to studio paintings that are based on the murals. So as simultaneous with the Diego Rivera's America exhibition, Rivera's landmark mural known as Pan American Unity is also on view at SF MoMA. It was an ambitious project, which is, you know, a story for another day, of moving this mural from the City College of San Francisco to SF MoMA, where it is now on view and will be for another year or so. And significantly, several of Rivera's apprentices went on to work with and train artists who would become the center of the Mission Murals movement. And notable among these is Emmylou Packard, who is shown here painting with Rivera and with Frida Kahlo. And as depicted in the mural that I just showed you, she's the figure in the red sweater. So Emmylou Packard, as I said, went on to train many of the artists that are featured in our project, and in fact, consulted on this iconic mural, which is in the Bank of America in the Mission District, Homage to Siqueiros. Emmylou Packard was really the kind of mastermind behind this iconic work and trained the painters who made it. So during the planning of the Rivera show and the display of Pan-American unity, we began sharing the idea of an online archive with local artists and historians, and it seemed like there might be an opportunity for SF MoMA to be helpful in documenting the moment in which the mural making culture really came to life in the Mission in the 1970s. And as I said, a moment when there was still really a living connection between Diego Rivera's assistants and the young muralists that began transforming the neighborhood. And it became clear that while some resources on this era exist, no projects have focused really specifically on the aging generation of San Francisco mural artists whose stories had not been captured. And there are some resources on this period, but they're often really difficult to discover and access. Here we have an image of a group of artists known as the Mujeres Muralistas with their now destroyed iconic mural Latino America from 1974. So the project began to take shape following some of those initial kind of early conversations with this group who became our community advisory committee. And they have been just so generous and active in their support and guidance for the project really at every turn. We met with the advisory group quarterly during, I would say, the first year of active planning. And then as we kind of got going with the production of the project, we met with a full group a couple of times, but then there were also kind of separate smaller groups who advised on various elements of the project, such as the documentary film and the publication. And, you know, we offered members an honorarium for their time, and sessions ranged, as I said, you know, from very open brainstorming sessions early on to really kind of get our hands around what we might do. And then as we got going, much more specific conversations and kind of direct feedback on project elements as they developed. And they were just incredibly generous in helping us find connections among their peers and directing us to research materials we might otherwise not have had access to, and also helping us with sleuthing of various kinds as we sought out information and the best ways to verify it. As I said, you know, much of this work was either not documented or documented in sort of spotty ways. And so they were really crucial to guiding us on how to make lots of decisions. So one key way the community advisors helped us was developing a list of artists and other community members key to the movement for whom we should conduct oral histories. And this is a project that builds on our interpretive media department's long history of artist interviews created for SF MoMA. And you can see the list of artists here that for whom we conducted the oral histories, and some great footage of those interviews taking place, mostly during the spring and summer of 2021. And of course, you know, this project sort of was born, or the idea for it was born before the pandemic, and there were so many delays because so much of the work had to happen in person, especially with elderly artists. So this was, when I say multi-year, it was more years than we anticipated from the outset. But the oral histories in many ways really laid the foundations for all elements of the project, including the digital publication. You know, all of the authors of the essays and the artist biographies were able to consult the oral histories as they developed their texts. And they also formed the basis for several other projects produced by our interpretive media team. And we're just, especially for this, you know, this part, we're really excited to make both the audio of the oral histories and transcripts of them available on the digital publication. So the interpretive media team also developed this really moving audio project, which was published this winter and which I really encourage you to listen to later. I was going to play a little clip of it now, but I think the audio is not the greatest. So I will encourage you to check that out afterwards. We also developed a short documentary film called Las Muralistas, which is also just incredibly beautiful and kind of emerged from the oral histories and evolved in some really interesting ways with the advisory group as well. It's a 25-minute film that focuses on women of the Mission Murals movement. You can see on the bottom left, Juana Alicia, who's really key in this in the movement and was part of our advisory group. And then it also features younger women muralists who are working today. And it's kind of a beautiful encapsulation of the cross-generational aspect of this movement. And again, this is also published as part of the digital publication. It's really, really worth the watch. So I encourage you to visit that as well. Moving out of the digital just for a moment, Mission Murals project broadly, as I said, has also encompassed many programs and events in the world, including serving as the focus of our education department's teacher advisory group, which is a program that provides teachers with both kind of peer supports as well as using the museum as a resource for multiple teachers across disciplines at one school. So each group has a cohort of teachers that focus on a particular topic. And for the last school year and this fall, there are cohorts who are using Mission Murals as their focus. So the teachers kind of, visit the mission, visit the SF MoMA collection, and then present draft lesson plans based on those experiences to each other for feedback. And then these curriculum kind of, become part of the approach in these schools for years. So it's really kind of a broad impact that program has. And for us, thinking about this resource as something that would be used in the classroom, it's also really been ideal to have this group of folks kind of in the family on this project. There was also a symposium that happened a couple of weeks ago that was run by our public engagement group, focusing on Mission Murals. And again, many of the participants in the advisory group and the publication then presented at the museum. And it similarly to the documentary had a very kind of cross-generational approach. But I mention it here because it was, a great example of the work on the publication kind of then informing what we were doing in this great public program that kind of was this lovely celebratory moment of everyone being all together at the museum. We also, in our education center, hosted a community residency that involved an exhibition also related to this project, History Matters and the Mission. And so that rounds out kind of all of the things that were happening kind of around the digital publication. So here we are at the publication, and I'm going to, this is my last slide, and I'm going to switch over to kind of walking you through the site a little bit. But this is an overview of what's in it. We commissioned 4 original essays, and the author list, as well as the topics of the essays were very much an active topic for our advisory group. They really helped us shape kind of what we were going to cover. We commissioned new artist biographies for several of the artists featured. And then there's a whole slew of primary sources that are available on the digital publication. Community Murals magazine, which was a publication I think it was from the late 70s into the late 80s. El Tecalote, which is a still running bilingual newspaper that's published in the Mission. The issues that we publish, of course, are tied to our topic and our time period and are otherwise not available. Same for Community Murals magazine. As our authors were developing their texts, they were incredibly grateful to have the scans of the full run, which is not available elsewhere. And then, of course, the murals themselves. The images of the murals are all from the 70s and 80s. And as I said, many of them are images of murals that no longer exist. And these were also provided to us by various members of our advisory group. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing the slides and move over to the publication. So here's the site. And, you know, this was, I'm happy to see that my colleague Sylvia Castillo is here, who is my key partner in the digital experience team here at SF MoMA. So Sylvia, feel free to pipe in if you have anything to add about navigating the site, and folks may have questions for you after as well. But I'll just walk you through a few things. So as I mentioned, the site is bilingual, and I'm happy to talk about kind of our approach to translation and kind of how we did that. I'm not sure how much nuts and bolts folks want, but I'm happy to field questions about that. As you can see, and let's see if I can, you can toggle between English and Spanish at any points on the site. So I may be loading very slowly. Yeah, it looks like I'm loading slowly. So maybe the toggling isn't going to work right now, but I encourage you to check that out. There we go. Here we are in Spanish. So from this landing page, you can kind of get an overview of the contents, the murals themselves, a map which shows the location of the murals, where they are or where they were. Here's a link to the documentary and the audio zine. Here are the oral histories and the essays and the primary sources. So this landing page just sort of gives you an overview. You can also access all of the contents by going to the contents page. Here's another way of accessing the murals. And once you're on a mural page, you can connect to you know, various things that are linked to it. So here's another Mujeres Muralistas mural. And the artist pages themselves that connect to the murals are also pretty robust. We have the bios. Here is the oral history with the audio and the transcript, and then other works by that artist. So there's kind of various ways in. The artist page function really as a kind of guidance if you want to approach it that way. And throughout the sites, in the essays and other materials, the artists are linked. So it all kind of holds together. I'll just show you some of the primary sources I was mentioning. So here's El Tecalote, which itself is a bilingual publication. These are key issues that connect to our topic. Community Murals magazine, this is the full run of that magazine. And then finally, another important aspect for us in this project was really pointing our readers out to other sources and other archives that exist. And this is another place where the community advisors really were helpful. So these are lots of links to kind of incredible vintage video artist interviews, documentation of the mural in this time, and various archives at other institutions that really provide additional context to our project. So I know watching someone else scroll through a site is not the most satisfying experience to have. So I'm going to stop sharing for now. I can go back to it if people want to see things specifically. But yeah, I'm happy to tell you more. I'm not sure which areas are most useful to this group. So I'm really happy to field questions or discuss. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kari. That's great. And please, everyone, if you have questions, drop them in the chat and we can bring them forward for the group, or feel free to come off mute and shout them out yourselves. I just will start us off a little bit. If you know, Katie made a comment in the chat that said, this is such an inspiring, multifaceted project. And I was kind of thinking the same thing, the multifaceted, the multimodal nature of it, the oral histories, the audio zine, the film. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it means to be a director of publications now, when you're doing all of these new formats that are like, you know, not something that we would have been doing 10 years ago. And talk a little bit about your experience about that. And then any kind of tips or you know, things that you might pass on to the group here today. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, there were some unusual circumstances that led to me I was actually served as the project director for the whole project, not just the digital publication in its final year and a half. So my colleague Chad Curver had been the project director. He was the chief officer of our division, and he left the museum let's see, in August 2021. So at that time, I took over as project director of the whole project. So that was an unusual. It was unusual that happened. It was, for me personally, it was really challenging and really satisfying in all kinds of ways. But I think it did make sense for me to take that on because, as I said, the publication was so intertwined with all of these other things. They were all part of this system. And so I think of all the people who could have kind of stepped into that role, it did make sense for me to do it, but it was unusual. And I think, I'm not sure it would be the model that we would do for something else like this, but given the circumstances we had, I think it did make a lot of sense. And I think for our division, working together in this way was also an experience that we hadn't had exactly like this before. We're often each kind of doing our own components, often in support of the museum's exhibitions and the collection. And so to have this project that was sort of related to our collection, related to this major exhibition, but also kind of off on its own was a different experience for us.
Yeah.
And I think we have learned a lot about it. I think we learned how each other worked in various ways that has been pretty interesting, and have thought a lot about how and when and if we'd want to do something similar again. Yeah. Did that answer?
It did. Yeah.
Your question? Okay.
Yeah. Katie, you've got your hand up. What do you have?
Hey there. This is so amazing, Kari. It's great to see how this all came together. My question was the same as Anna has a question in the chat as well, just on the technical side. Like, how was this built? Was it in your web CMS? Was it just a little bit about that? And I guess also kind of the size of the team. You alluded to that, particularly around a lot of the media production and other things, but it also looks like there must have been, deep involvement with people from potentially your library and archives, if there were, things that were digitized, some other things. So maybe if you could talk just about the nuts and bolts of the actual technical piece, but then also a little bit of the staffing resources.
Yeah. Let's see where to begin. I mean, I think I'm glad Sylvia's here. She can weigh in as well. I mean, we really the kind of structure of this project was really based on our previous bilingual digital publication that we produced a few years ago on Japanese photography, which is a collection-based digital publication that is also bilingual and has many of the same features. It's the same system for toggling back and forth between English and Japanese. And it also has artist interviews and primary source materials. So that was really built as a template that we could use for other bilingual publications. And so that was kind of the framework that we had, which was a huge advantage. We didn't have to start from scratch going in on that. In terms of, and if you have other specific questions, I'm going to let Sylvia field them in a second. But I think in terms of the staffing, yeah, I mean, it was a huge team of both internal folks and many contractors of various kinds. As far as the scanning and processing of materials, we were really lucky actually to have many of the community members help us with some of that, like the Community Murals magazine, for instance. Tim Drescher, who is on our community advisory group and who contributed most of the images that are in the mural database, was working with this archivist. He was the editor of this magazine, and they had been working to preserve the magazines and just kind of gave us those scans, which was incredible. We were really gifted with a lot in terms of that. But as far as the kind of the team building the publication, we had an army of translators, freelance editors, copy editors, various other folks. The IM department also worked with a production company on the film and on the audio zine. So it was a pretty vast team. There is a listing on the website of the project team, and then kind of long acknowledgements of other folks who were involved. So it was a lot.
That's great. I was wondering, you just mentioned the translation. Can you talk a little bit about the work
Yeah.
that you went through and how you dealt with the bilingual part of it?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's, we did a lot of talking about what was like how to approach that. I think our goal really was to every original piece of writing is translated into Spanish. I think in all cases, all of our text was written in English and then translated into Spanish. And then for other components of the project, we didn't have the kind of bandwidth to fully translate every single thing. For instance, the transcripts of the oral histories, we did a kind of intro to them that we translated into Spanish, but these are hour-and-a-half long interviews, and we just recognized that translating that was not going to be possible. Some of the primary sources too, we took a similar approach. We kind of we wrote little introductions to them and translated those, but didn't fully translate all of the original materials. For El Tecolote, it was easy because that publication is already bilingual. But for the other sources, we chose just to kind of translate the framing materials. I mean, as far as the workflow, I mean, for this project, it was complicated. In many ways, many of our authors are Spanish speakers and wanted to review the translations. We also had artists review lots of the texts. So there were many layers of review, which is very time consuming and very challenging. So we had the texts translated and then they were reviewed by the authors and sometimes by artists. Then they were copy edited in Spanish, proofed in Spanish. So there were many layers. It was sort of like doing a publication twice, with a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And, it was important to us to do it that way. But I will say, yes, very time consuming and lots of wrangling, as you can imagine.
Yeah, indeed. Great. Thank you. I've got a question in the chat here from Taylor. It says, I have a similar question to everyone who has chimed in so far. I work with a very small team, and I wonder what were some of the main components of the project that were the most important for your team to produce. Like if you were narrowing in on not such a vast project, but you really wanted to get to the heart of it. What are those elements for a smaller team like tackle?
In terms of choosing content, or
well,
I'm not sure I fully understand the.
Yeah, I think, well, maybe I don't either. I think that the question is around, and Taylor, please feel free to chime in the chat or off mute if you can clarify. But I'm reading the question as I'm a small team. Of the main components of the many things that you've produced, if you can't do all of those things, what would I focus in on? What for you were the sort of key aspects of that you think really resonate?
Yeah, I mean, for this project, to me, it's really the oral histories that are the heart of it. I think that was really was the desire to preserve those stories while we could. Many of these artists were aging, and as I said, they were just so generative and informative to other aspects of the project. So for this particular thing, I mean, this is a highly specific situation. That was really what was central, and I think too, we could have had, we could have had 20 essays, or we did this group of 4, and I think and the archival materials too that we provided, we really do also view this as a way of inspiring other scholarship and kind of giving some tools to do that. And so it's definitely not definitive. I think the other thing was choosing a very discrete time frame. So it's 1972 to 1988. We could have started earlier. We could have gone into the 90s. There were lots happening then as well. And there are other artists we could have included as well. I think part of the hard part of this project and sometimes painful part of the project was, working with the community advisors who had so many other ideas and so many other avenues we could have explored. And we really did have to commit to what to them, I think, it sometimes felt like a narrow focus to make it viable.
Yeah, that's great. That's interesting. Taylor, thank you for that question, because I think, Kari, your answer about the oral histories surprised me. I think that's great. And that makes a lot of sense now you say that that's an important, really core part of it. Also, hearing that what many of us are looking at this project as seeing it very expansive and all the things that you've done, but you're saying there's all these things that we didn't do. We've actually really, even as a large institution with this big grant, we really had to narrow in. So that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Andy, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I had a question about the usability of the actual site, because I think that, translating from a book or a catalog to, you know, and more of an interactive multimedia site. You know, there's so many other variables that come into play about, you know, do we want to copy one-to-one one's experience of like flipping the pages and being in a book, or do we think about other ways to interact with this content? So I'm interested to think about, you know, what were some of the concerns, or what were some of like important features that you wanted to include in the, not just the content, but also how the user is, you know, digesting that content and clicking around the site and moving through this content. You know, it's just, it opens up sort of a Pandora's box of so many other different really cool things, but also, you know, problems that may arise in the fact that, you know, you're moving into a digital sphere instead of a physical print book. And so, you know, I think it's just like a really interesting opportunity. And so I'm interested to know, like, you know, what your team was thinking about in terms of usability.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, Andy. I mean, I think, you know, going into this project, we knew we would be using the template developed for Japanese photography. So it's sort of a lot of those questions were ones we didn't have to or get to grapple with necessarily as we embarked on this. And so I think that, you know, that was a blessing in a lot of ways. And also, you know, we just sort of knew what the end result was going to be like based on Japanese photography. Sylvia, I don't know if you have anything to say. I don't want to put you on the spot. If you don't want to join us, that's okay too.
Oh, no. Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed seeing the presentation because it's nice to be able to look at it from the outside too. And yeah, it did. I mean, we've worked on these bilingual publications for the past couple years. Well, I've been here for a couple years, and these have been one of the main focuses of my work in terms of how to present a digital publication as opposed to like a book form. We did actually consult with a UX designer who helped us build out the template for Japanese photography beforehand. I mean, it is a very difficult thing to sort of bring translations into the digital sphere. We tried to look at how other museums had been doing it, and there was an option of just putting the content side by side. But when we had been talking about Japanese photography, for example, you have the different characters, you know, you have like Western characters or like Roman characters, and then you have the Japanese characters. And so how do you put those both on a page at the same time and expect someone to be able to sort of switch out and really take in the content? And so our UX designer was talking about this concept of a global gateway, which is what the toggle on the side is for English and Spanish, and then on Japanese photography, Japanese and English. And we just wanted to be able to sort of respect the artists that are in their own sort of identities as they come in, without having to say like, oh, hey, you know, here's this content first, and you can only see it in one language. So she had brought up this idea of the global gateway. She also brought up the idea of having a contents, which is more of a nod to a book, you know, as you would see like, oh, hey, what's part of this publication? You have that, and you're able to navigate to different areas of the site and kind of feel more immersed in it as well. And if you'll notice, we tried also to really get people in the publication and feel like they're in this different space, because we don't have like the navigation bar at the top will look different than it does on our sfmoma.org site. So it has its own sort of visual identity, and you kind of feel, or hopefully you feel, as though you are part of this digital publication in particular. And it's the same for Japanese photography. Japanese photography has its own visual identity as well. And so hopefully you do feel more immersed than you would on different areas of the site. And that's supposed to also be a nod to how you would feel if you were, you know, having like a physical book in your hand. However, obviously going to digital lets us do cool things like showing people the audio zine and the documentary, and being able to have these visual components and be able to just like the map to being able to interact in those ways from anywhere. I don't know if that answered your question, Andy, but hopefully it maybe explores more of that concept of a digital publication, what it can do and where it can go.
Yeah, Andy put in the chat, thank you, very insightful and helpful. And I would second that, saying thank you both for those answers. I have one more that I want to ask that just kind of follows up on that and kind of maybe we'll wrap this up. I'm just wondering if you know, that you brought in this a UX person early on, you've been thinking about the structure of these books. Any plans to do any kind of testing now after the fact, or like following analytics, seeing how these are received? How people are using the different languages? Maybe you've already done some of that.
Yeah, we are going to be working with an evaluator and starting that soon. So yeah, that's part of our obligation from our IMLS grant, but it's also something, of course, we're very interested in learning about ourselves, and especially I'm super interested to know how people are using the bilingual component of that. So that will definitely be part of our focus.
Fantastic. Well, maybe we can get you both back here to talk about that when the results come in. We'd love to hear how that happens.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Kari. It was great having you here and learning more about this project. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.